If you guys like the content, just make sure you subscribe and turn your notifications on. It helps out a lot and it gets my channel out there a little bit more. Thanks for watching, guys. So today we're going to just be going over film studies, a little bit about the way I do studies and how I approach everything. I just recently watched Dune Part 2 and it inspired me to come on and study some of the shots from the film. So this is one of the shots that stood out to me. So I'm just going to show kind of the process that I go about whenever I'm studying a still image like this and how I take notes and apply it. So we'll start off with just taking a few notes and then get into start painting. And yeah, so first thing I notice is the color palette. So it's got a pretty analogous color palette. So it's mostly staying, in this range of the color palette. So we got, browns. We got more saturated oranges in here. The only cool-ish tones I see in here are going to be in the reflection of the sphere, which I still think it's not even... Yeah, so even when I color pick, it still says that these are warm tones. Yeah, maybe up in here we got some tones moving towards the cooler side. But yeah, the rest of it I would consider it's pretty much an analogous color palette. Another thing that I notice is the composition. So we have a central composition. The main character, Paul, is, sitting right here in the middle. So one thing that this kind of composition can represent and state is, power, stability, a sense of regalness. But I do think it's interesting that the way that they set it up, because it is set up in the middle with him, but then we have this other focal point right here that's offset from the center. And the way that they balance this is using his cape to pull you back into the image, and then you have this explosion, and then you come back down here, and then you just repeat the pattern, because these are blocking you in right here, pulls you back into Paul, and it just creates like a loop for your eye to go to. So I think that's really interesting, the way that they did that, by having just this simple idea of pulling you back in with his cape, and you go through the explosion to this next focal point, and then you have this rocks framing you back into it. So even though it is a centralized composition, you still have this balance back and forth. And that's really important when you're making an image, because it helps keep the eyes focused on one part of the image. So you're not veering off over into here and losing interest in the frame. So I think that's pretty much the things that I wanted to take note of and try to represent in the study. It's going to be more of like an observational study, so kind of warming up, putting my painting skills to the test, just trying to look at colors and pick the colors without using the eyedropper, build up my color intelligence, and yeah, we'll see how it turns out. But yeah, just remember how you can construct images by using just a couple simple balancing acts when it comes to your shapes. And the other thing that I wanted to, take note of is how the color palette is used. And, we have this more saturated area right here with these saturated oranges and browns, and then the rest of the image is kind of gray. There's not a lot of color in it, not really a lot of contrast. If we turn this image black and white, look how much contrast we have right in the center of the image. Immediately your eye goes to it. As you move further away, there's a lot less contrast. And I think that's also important to take note of. So yeah, we're gonna start painting this up, and I'll see you guys here in a minute. Okay, so let's get started. First, I'm just gonna start blocking in some colors. Same way that I do like any of my thumbnails normally, start blocking in my foreground elements. Trying to just lay down a little bit of color. I'm trying to just estimate the colors without picking from the original image. It's a good idea to do that in practice, just like seeing colors. And for the most part, after the fact, when I went back and checked my colors, I mean, obviously I was a little bit off. Nobody's perfect, but pretty proud of my ability to select the colors just based off of what I thought they would be. But here I'm just trying to scribble in a little bit of silhouette. I did go back and speed this up ×2, so it'll help me get through the video a little bit quicker, and the actual process of making these is not super exciting, so I think time-lapse and just doing a little voiceover on top of it will be a little bit easier to do, a little bit quicker. I think real time it was a 30-minute sketch, so ×2, I think I broke it down into like 15 minutes. But yeah, just establishing some silhouettes, and then I'll go in with my eraser and just carve into it, just kind of touch up the shapes. I'm not trying to be perfect on the proportions and all that stuff. I just want it to be relatively close. I think the more important part of this is like trying to establish a little bit of color. See if I can select and pick the right colors. But here I am, I'm just kind of adding in the ground plane. And then here we're trying to add in the that little structure down there. I think that's another point of interest, so a little bit more contrast there. I still do like to work in different layers while I'm doing this stuff, even though they are just sketches. It just helps out being able to like paint behind objects and stuff like that without having to worry about messing up the shapes and silhouettes. But yeah, here I'm just trying to imply a little bit of that smoke. I could have just used like a, you know, a smoke brush, but I think it's better to just, you know, imply it by adding some larger brush strokes and trying to work it up by hand. It's good practice too. And then starting to add in a little bit more saturation into these smoke clouds. There's a lot of experimentation, really. I'll pick a color that I think is correct, lay it down, and then check. If it looks similar to what is in the original image, then I'll just keep moving forward. If not, then I'll, you know, adjust my tones and values and then try it again. Here I am trying to add a little bit of that sky. I think for a second I was putting in, yeah, there we go. I'm starting to move towards the more cooler tone that I was seeing up in that corner. And sometimes it's nice to exaggerate these things too, because, you know, in my sketch I put a lot more green down than there is in the original, but it's kind of one of those things that you have like the artistic freedom to exaggerate certain things and maybe push them a little bit further if you think it works well with the image, which here I think it does. It's not like a very hard exaggeration, it's a more subtle exaggeration of the color palette. So I think it still works with the image and helps balance it out. Just trying to, you know, add more depth and volume to this smoke. In hindsight, looking at it, I think I could have done a little more color, a little more saturation in that area, but another thing that I did notice while I was painting this up is that even like those subtle value shifts in the ground plane help create like leading lines back into the focal area of the image. Here I am just working on the foreground area a little bit. Using the lasso tool just to create a little bit of separation. Normally for these kind of paintings I try to use more toothy, rougher brushes. I like how they imitate, you know, the traditional look. I pretty much always try to stay away from like the airbrushy or hard rounds. That's just like my own personal taste, but I like the way some of these brushes have a little bit of grain and tooth to them. Makes it feel more realistic, like you were painting traditionally. Adding a little saturation into the foreground. It's very subtle, but you know, I think it helps. It might not be there as prevalent in the reference photo, but I think it's like, as long as you're not going too far away from the original, I think it's still useful, because you can kind of approach these images like, how would I do it differently, or what could I do to improve on it? Because just because these people are masters, you know, doesn't mean that there's nothing that they could have done differently to change it. Which I mean, this image is awesome, and I personally probably would keep it pretty close to as original as it is. But you know, in the moment when you're painting some of these things, you make these almost like split-second decisions. It's more like an intuitive thing. I think it's important to listen to that intuition that you have, even if it's not always right. It is important when it comes to decision making, as well as problem solving. I think as long as those decisions don't take away from like the overall message and function of the image, I feel like it's okay to veer away from these studies references a little bit. So even with this, what I have down right here, I mean, this is enough to like call it quits and, take what you can from it and see, if you could apply it in your own image, or maybe even, completely start a new one. Another thing that is really good for doing studies like this are you recreate the image while using reference. You try to soak in as much information from the reference that you can while recreating the image. And then as soon as you're done, you do a second version without looking at the reference or the first painting and see what you have retained. This will help you build your visual library and help you, be able to create things from imagination, such as color palettes, or, for this, like how the smoke varies in colors, the different forms that they have. I didn't do that with this one, but that is a technique that I use pretty often when I'm doing studies, is I just try to see what I can remember from the study without looking at anything. And just doing that over time, over and over again, you'll start to build up these visual libraries to where you can start creating stuff like this from imagination. And that's pretty much I would say that's like the next level of being able to create efficiently and originally, is being able to reference your imagination and reference these studies that you've done in the past and piece it all together into new concepts and new paintings, new ideas. And that's probably the ultimate goal for most artists, is getting to that stage of competency in their skill level that they can just do stuff without looking at reference. But until you get to that level, which with certain things I am at that level, there's certain things I'm not at that level. But until you can get to that level, super, super important to always use reference. So yeah, just adding more variation of hue and color, starting to lighten it up. Using like a brush with a little bit of scatter on it, just to try and get a little texture, a little like random variation to the smoke, which I think helps because smoke is a very random thing. Making sure to try to zoom in, zoom out a little bit so I can check how the image is comparing to the other one. I think right here I went in with the sponge and saturated up the colors a little bit more. That's another little Photoshop trick. You can use that little sponge brush and switch it to saturate, and it'll pretty much protect the hues that you already have laid down, and it'll just bring them up in saturation. I think as far as the study goes, though, I've captured the essence of the image, captured the ideas, and at this point I'm just kind of having fun with it, touching things up, making it look more presentable. But you could easily call it quits at this point and then move on to the next stage and try to replicate it from memory, or if you're doing multiple studies at once, which a lot of the times I do, I'll find 4 or 5 images and then just set a timer of 15 minutes or something like that, and then just that'll be like a quick little warm up that I do before I'll get into the nitty gritty. Putting a little blur on there, just add a little razzle dazzle. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much finished up with this, and hope you guys could take away something from it. Hope it was helpful. I plan on doing more film studies like this. Maybe create like a playlist series of just doing film studies as warm-ups. If you guys would be interested in seeing more stuff like this, just let me know in the comments. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys.